They laughed when she walked into the room. A black woman in a leather jacket and combat boots, standing before the most feared triad leader in Southeast Asia. Zhen Chang's power was written in the intricate dragons crawling up his neck, in the jade rings on his fingers, in the silence that followed his slightest gesture. One of his lieutenants muttered something in Cantonese about circus acts and desperation. Another sneered, suggesting cruder reasons for her presence. She heard every word. She understood every insult. She filed every face away for later. Okay, pause for a second. I need to know something. Where are you right now? What are you doing while you're listening to this? Because I'm imagining some of you are folding laundry, some are pretending to work, and at least one person is listening to this in the bathroom. If that's your respect, no shame here. Leave a comment and tell me where you're tuning in from. And if you're invested in watching Shauna absolutely demolish everyone who wronged her, do me a favor, hit like and subscribe. More stories like this are coming, and you're not going to want to miss them. All right, let's get back to it. When Zhen's advisor demanded her credentials, Lydia Kitchen slid a single photograph across the mahogany table. It showed a compound reduced to smoking rubble, flames still consuming what remained, bodies scattered across scorched earth like discarded shadows. This was a fortified military black site in Libya. 47 guards. I walked out. They did not. Her voice carried no pride, no threat, just the cold weight of documented fact. My resume is the body count I left behind. My credentials are classified by governments that deny my existence. You do not hire me because you trust me. You hire me because I am the last option before your funeral. 24 hours later, 53 professional killers would lie unconscious across Zhen's estate grounds. Mercenaries, assassins, special operatives, all sent to claim the largest bounty in global syndicate history. By sunrise, every single one would be neutralized by the woman they had mocked during her interview. If you believe extraordinary talent comes from unexpected places, hit subscribe right now. Only people who judge books by their covers would scroll past this story. Zhen Chang had built his empire through calculated brutality and strategic genius. From the back alleys of Kowloon to the luxury towers of Singapore, his name commanded both terror and reluctant respect. The Dragon Fang triad controlled everything, shipping routes that moved billions in legitimate cargo, alongside contraband, entertainment complexes that laundered money through legitimate businesses, technology firms that provided the digital backbone for half of Asia's underground economy. For 23 years, he had outmaneuvered rivals, corrupted officials, and eliminated threats with surgical efficiency. But now, at 51, the apex predator had become prey. It began with whispers, allied families canceling long-standing agreements, key associates suddenly unreachable, business partners developing convenient amnesia about shared ventures. Then came the violence. A car bomb that vaporized his armored Mercedes, empty because of a last-minute schedule change. A sniper round that punched through bulletproof glass during a rare public ceremony, missing his head by inches. Poison in his morning tea that killed the taster before the cup reached Zhen's lips. Someone wanted Zhen Chang dead, someone close, someone patient, and they were not working alone. The final message arrived when his head of security, a former military officer who had protected Zhen for 18 years, was found murdered in his own safe house. The scene was staged as a professional execution, but the message carved into his chest was personal. Full moon, your last. Zhen knew the date, exactly 5 days away. 5 days to find protection in a world where loyalty had been purchased away from him. 5 days before every major criminal organization in Asia would send their elite operatives to claim the $25 million bounty on his head. 5 days before the full moon rose over his compound and brought death with it. Desperation makes even the proudest men consider the unthinkable. It made Zhen Chang, a man raised in traditions that valued face above life itself, reach across every prejudice he had been taught to hold. Lydia Kitchen was not looking for work that day. She was looking for oblivion, something that had eluded her since her dishonorable discharge 3 years ago. Seoul was supposed to be her disappearing act, a megacity where an American black woman could vanish into the anonymous crowds while the nightmares of what she had done, what she had been forced to do in rooms with no names and no witnesses, slowly faded into background noise. They never did. Instead, she took jobs that required her particular skills without asking questions about her past. Underground fight clubs where broken bones were part of the business model. Private security for executives who needed someone expendable. Night shifts at clubs where her presence alone prevented most trouble. When the money ran low, she kept to herself, spoke only when necessary, and tried to forget the woman she had been, the weapon they had forged in black sites and deployed in wars the public would never know existed. The robbery erupted while she was buying cigarettes and instant ramen. 4 men, visibly desperate, holding a convenience store hostage. They had the elderly owner on his knees and a young university student frozen behind the counter. They did not see Lydia as a threat, just another customer to control while they emptied the register and tried to outrun whatever debts had driven them to this. Their mistake. 19 seconds. That was all it took. No weapons drawn, no words spoken, just the precise, economical violence that had been burned into her muscle memory through 8 years of black operations training. The first attacker's wrist snapped when he turned his gun toward the cashier. The second collapsed from a strike to the solar plexus too fast for the security camera to capture clearly. The third tried to flee but found himself face down on the tile floor, arm hyperextended behind him, Lydia's knee pressed between his shoulder blades. The fourth managed to fire once, the bullet embedding itself harmlessly in a refrigerator, before he joined his colleagues in unconsciousness. What Lydia did not know was that across the street, in a black Mercedes with windows tinted dark enough to hide secrets, sat Zhen's last remaining trusted advisor, watching everything. "We found someone," he told Zhen over an encrypted line. "Someone impossible." Zhen Chang's estate resembled a fortress more than a home. 20-foot walls topped with thermal cameras and motion sensors. Armed guards patrolling manicured gardens where beauty served as camouflage for strategic sight lines. Bulletproof glass in every window. The architecture, brutal concrete and traditional Chinese elements fused into something uniquely threatening, projected absolute power and deliberate isolation. Like its owner, the compound rejected vulnerability and embraced control. When Lydia arrived for the interview wearing combat boots, dark tactical pants, and a leather jacket that concealed the scars mapping her arms and back, the guards exchanged looks. One muttered something in Cantonese about Zhen's desperation reaching pathetic new depths. Another laughed and suggested significantly more offensive possibilities for why she was really there. A third spat near her boots, testing boundaries. Lydia understood every word. Her Cantonese was flawless, learned during 2 classified operations in Hong Kong and Macau that officially never happened. She said nothing. She filed their faces away in her memory. Later, when her position was secure, they would learn the cost of underestimation. Later, they would understand why silence is often the most terrifying response. The interview was not really an interview. It was Zhen Chang, seated behind a desk of black walnut, surrounded by 4 remaining bodyguards, studying her like a threat assessment made flesh. His questions were designed to insult, to provoke, to test whether she could be broken by words before bullets ever became necessary. "You are American. Why are you in Korea?" "You are a woman. How can you protect me from professional killers?" "You are black. Will you not stand out in Seoul like a target?" Lydia's answers were equally blunt, delivered with the flat affect of someone who had stopped caring about offense years ago. "I am here because American intelligence agencies are still hunting me in the Middle East and North Africa. Seoul is the last place they would expect a ghost to hide. I blend in by standing out. People see the surface and miss the threat. I can protect you because gender is irrelevant when you know 17 ways to kill someone with your bare hands. The assassins coming for you will learn this distinction shortly before they lose consciousness. I am the woman who destroyed an entire military black site because they made the mistake of underestimating me. The same mistake your guards just made. The same mistake your enemies are making right now. She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow filled the entire room. The men coming for you are professionals. They are trained, equipped, and motivated by $25 million. But they have something I do not have, the belief that they will survive this. That confidence is their weakness. I stopped believing in survival a long time ago. That makes me significantly more dangerous than anything they have ever encountered. Zhen Chang studied her for a long moment, reading the truth written in the stillness of her posture, in the absolute absence of fear or bravado. Finally, he spoke a single word in Cantonese to his guards. Leave. They hesitated. He repeated it with the quiet finality of a man who had built an empire on the foundation of absolute obedience. When the room was empty, except for the two of them, Zhen Chang leaned back in his chair and allowed himself the smallest hint of a smile. Tell me, Miss Kitchen, what do you need to keep me alive until sunrise after the full moon? Lydia Kitchen pulled a folded piece of paper from her jacket pocket and slid it across the desk. It was a list, a very specific, very disturbing list. Everything on this paper: complete access to your compound's security systems, command authority over all personnel during the lockdown, and one other thing. What? When this is over, and you ask me who betrayed you, you will not like the answer. Can you handle the truth even if it destroys everything you believe about loyalty and family? Zhen Chang's expression hardened into something ancient and unforgiving. Miss Kitchen, I have survived by knowing that truth is always more valuable than comfort. Tell me what I need to hear, not what I want to believe. Then we have an understanding. The full moon rises in 4 days. By the time it sets, either you will be dead or you will owe me considerably more than money. She stood, turned toward the door and paused. One more thing, your guards, the ones who laughed, when this is over, you might consider replacing them. Not for what they said about me, I do not care about words, but because anyone who underestimates threats based on appearance cannot keep you safe. Stupidity is more dangerous than betrayal. Zhen Chang watched her leave, already making mental calculations about how many of his people would need to be eliminated when this was finished. If she was right about one thing, she was likely right about everything. The full moon was 4 days away. The clock was counting down. And for the first time in 23 years, Zhen Chang felt something he had almost forgotten, hope that he might actually survive what was coming. Zhen Chang's empire had been built on 2 principles: absolute loyalty and the understanding that betrayal carried a price measured in blood. For 23 years, these principles had held his world together like steel cables under impossible tension. In a single week, both had snapped. The Dragon Fang Triad controlled Southeast Asia's shadow economy with surgical precision. Shipping containers moved through Singapore and Hong Kong, carrying both legitimate electronics and weapons destined for conflicts the UN pretended not to see. Entertainment complexes in Macau laundered hundreds of millions through legitimate gaming operations. Technology firms in Seoul and Taipei provided encrypted communication networks for half the criminal organizations in the Pacific Rim. Every operation generated profit. Every profit reinforced power. Every power multiplied control. But empires are only as stable as the men who guard them. Chen Wei had been Zhen's head of security for 18 years. Former People's Liberation Army, dishonorably discharged for reasons that remained conveniently classified. He had protected Zhen through 3 assassination attempts, 2 territorial wars, and countless smaller skirmishes that never made headlines. Chen Wei knew every security protocol, every safe house, every escape route that Zhen might use if the walls came crumbling down. He knew too much to ever be allowed to leave. He knew exactly enough to be invaluable. They found him in his apartment in Kowloon, hanging from a steel beam with a black hood over his head. The Hong Kong police would rule it suicide within hours. Zhen's money and influence ensured that much. But the message carved into Chen Wei's chest told a different story, one written in precise cuts that spoke of professional work and personal hatred. Full moon, your last. Zhen stood in that apartment for exactly 3 minutes, studying the scene with the detached focus that had kept him alive through decades of violence. The rope was military grade. The knots were correct for suicide staging, but the angle was wrong. Chen Wei would have fought, and there were no signs of struggle except the defensive wounds on his palms that the police would conveniently overlook. The carving had been done post-mortem, which meant this was theater, not torture. Someone wanted Zhen to know they could reach his inner circle. Someone wanted him afraid. The full moon was 5 days away. Zhen made 3 calls from Chen Wei's apartment, each to men he believed he could trust. The first call went to voicemail, unusual for someone who always answered. The second connected, but the man's voice carried a hesitation that had never been there before, a pause before speaking that suggested someone else was listening. The third man answered quickly, too quickly, with the eagerness of someone who had been waiting for contact. None of these responses felt right. All of them felt like betrayal wearing different masks. By the time Zhen returned to his compound, the reality had crystallized into something sharp and inescapable. He was alone in a city of traitors. His empire had been infiltrated at levels he could not yet see. The $25 million bounty had turned loyalty into a commodity cheaper than bullets. Every handshake was a potential threat. Every meeting could be his last. He had 5 days to find someone who had nothing to lose and everything to prove. 5 days to locate a protector who existed outside his compromised network. 5 days to survive what Chen Wei's corpse had promised. The full moon would rise whether he was ready or not. The only question remaining was whether he would live to see it set. Seoul had 6 million ways to disappear, and Lydia Kitchen had mastered most of them. She lived in Itaewon, where foreign faces blended into the urban noise without raising questions. Her apartment was a 4th-floor walk-up with no elevator, no doorman, no security cameras that might record her comings and goings. The landlord accepted cash and asked nothing beyond the first month's deposit. Perfect. Her life had contracted to a series of careful routines designed to leave no pattern. She worked 3 nights a week at an underground fight club in Gangnam, where broken noses and dislocated shoulders were part of the entertainment value, and nobody cared about legal work permits. Twice a week, she pulled security shifts for a Russian businessman who paid in untraceable cryptocurrency and preferred employees who understood the value of selective blindness. The rest of her time dissolved into the anonymous rhythm of a city that never stopped moving. She spoke little. She remembered everything. She slept in 2-hour intervals with her back against the wall and a combat knife within reach. The nightmares came regardless. 3 years since her dishonorable discharge. 3 years since the operations in Libya and Syria that had turned her from a decorated specialist into a liability too dangerous to acknowledge. 3 years since her commanding officer had handed her discharge papers and said, "You were too good at what we needed you to do. Now you're a problem we can't solve legally." The subtext was clear. Disappear, or we will make you disappear. So she had become a ghost, haunting the margins of a city that asked no questions of those who preferred to remain invisible. The convenience store was 2 blocks from her apartment, open 24 hours, fluorescent bright and reliably empty after midnight. Lydia was buying cigarettes and instant ramen when the 4 men entered with guns drawn and desperation written across their faces like a verdict. They were amateurs, probably running from debt collectors or worse. Hopping a quick robbery might buy them a few more days of survival. The elderly owner dropped to his knees immediately. A young woman behind the counter froze, eyes wide with the kind of terror that comes from never having faced real violence. The men shouted commands in Korean, adrenaline making their voices crack. They waved their weapons with the jerky movements of people who had never actually shot anyone and hoped they would not have to start tonight. They noticed Lydia only as another body to control. One of them gestured at her with his pistol, barking orders to get down, stay quiet, cooperate. She set down her basket slowly, carefully, her movements designed to appear compliant, non-threatening. Their mistake. 19 seconds. That was all the time required to dismantle their amateur operation. Lydia moved with the cold precision of someone who had stopped thinking about violence years ago and simply executed it as muscle memory. The first man's wrist snapped audibly when she redirected his gun away from the cashier. The second collapsed from a strike to the solar plexus that shut down his diaphragm. The third tried to run but found himself face down on the tile, arm hyperextended behind him, Lydia's knee driving pressure between his shoulder blades. The fourth fired once in panic, the bullet embedding itself harmlessly in a refrigerator full of energy drinks, before a precise strike to his temple sent him into unconsciousness. Silence settled over the store like fallout. The elderly owner stared at her with something between terror and gratitude. The young woman was crying quietly, still frozen in place. Lydia retrieved her basket, set cash on the counter for her purchases, and walked toward the exit without a word. She had made it 3 steps outside when the black Mercedes pulled up to the curb. The rear window descended with mechanical precision. The man inside was middle-aged, expensively dressed, with the kind of face that had learned to reveal nothing. He spoke in English, his accent carrying the polish of international business schools and backroom negotiations. "Miss Kitchen, my employer would like to discuss a business opportunity." Lydia kept walking. She had learned long ago that opportunities offered from the back of luxury cars rarely ended well. "He is willing to pay $1 million for 5 days of work." She stopped, not because of the money, though the number was obscene, but because someone knowing her name in Seoul meant her disappearing act had failed. If one person had found her, others would follow. The Americans, the agencies who wanted her silenced, the governments whose secrets she carried in her head like unexploded ordnance. "He is desperate," the man continued. "You are invisible. This combination serves both your interests." Lydia turned slowly, studying the car, the man, the angles of potential threat. "Who is your employer?" "Someone who needs to survive until the full moon rises. Someone who cannot trust anyone in his current organization. Someone who recognizes that the most dangerous weapon is the one nobody sees coming." She understood the translation immediately. Whoever this man worked for was drowning in betrayal and willing to gamble everything on an outsider with nothing to lose. "5 days," she said. "After that, I disappear again, permanently." 5 days is all he needs. The car will take you to him. Lydia Kitchen climbed into the Mercedes, knowing that she was trading one form of invisibility for another. The ghost of Seoul was about to become someone's last desperate option for survival. The full moon was 4 days away. The compound walls rose 20 feet high, concrete reinforced with steel, and topped with thermal cameras that tracked movement with mechanical precision. Lydia counted 12 visible guard positions before the Mercedes even reached the main gate. The architecture was brutal minimalism fused with traditional Chinese elements, curved roof lines over fortress walls, decorative dragons carved into concrete that could stop armor-piercing rounds, beauty as camouflage for absolute security. The gate opened silently. The car rolled through a courtyard where armed men watched her with the flat assessment of predators evaluating unfamiliar prey. She cataloged their positions, their weapons, their sight lines. 18 guards visible from the car, at least a dozen more hidden in elevated positions, every angle covered, every approach monitored. Someone had designed this compound to repel small armies. And yet Chen Wei had died anyway, which meant the threat was already inside. When Lydia stepped out of the Mercedes, the atmosphere shifted immediately. The guards nearest the entrance exchanged glances, their expressions cycling from confusion to disbelief to barely concealed contempt. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, muttered something in Cantonese to his companion. The words carried clearly in the evening air. "This is what desperation looks like. A foreign woman. He might as well hire a circus performer." His companion laughed, adding his own assessment. "Maybe she is here for other services. Zhen's tastes must be changing in his old age." A third guard spat deliberately near Lydia's boots, the gesture designed to test boundaries and establish hierarchy. He said nothing, but his message was explicit. "You do not belong here, and we do not respect you." Lydia's expression remained perfectly neutral. She understood every word, filed every face away in the catalog of threats she maintained in her head. Later, when circumstances shifted and her position was secure, they would learn that underestimation carried consequences. Later, they would understand why silence was often the most dangerous response. For now, she simply walked toward the main entrance, her boots clicking against polished stone, her posture radiating the kind of stillness that only came from absolute confidence or absolute indifference to outcome. The guards watched her pass with sneers they made no effort to hide. The interior of the compound matched the exterior, wealth expressed through restraint, power communicated through space rather than ostentation. Dark wood panels lined walls of exposed concrete, minimal furniture selected for form and function. Everything positioned with the precision of someone who understood that control extended to the smallest details. The air smelled faintly of sandalwood and gun oil. Zhen's advisor, the man from the Merceds, gestured toward a sitting area where she would wait for the interview. But before Lydia could move in that direction, a door at the far end of the hallway opened, and a woman emerged who commanded immediate attention through sheer presence rather than announcement. She was perhaps 35, elegant in tailored business attire that cost more than Lydia had earned in the past year. Her hair was pulled back severely, emphasizing sharp cheekbones and eyes that assessed threats with the same cold efficiency Lydia recognized in herself. She moved with the controlled grace of someone trained in disciplines that went beyond boardroom negotiations. This was Zhen Mei, the sister. Lydia had been briefed minimally during the car ride, but she recognized power when she saw it. Not the borrowed authority of someone standing in reflected glory, but the genuine article, the kind that came from building something yourself and defending it against all challengers. Zhen Mei stopped 3 paces away, studying Lydia with unconcealed skepticism. When she spoke, her English was flawless, her tone carrying the diplomatic chill of someone delivering a verdict. "So you are my brother's desperate solution, the American with the impressive convenience store performance." She circled slowly, examining Lydia from multiple angles like a jeweler assessing a questionable stone. "I advised against this. You stand out. You have no loyalty to our organization. You carry the stink of American intelligence operations. Any one of these factors makes you a liability we cannot afford." Lydia met her gaze directly, refusing to track the sister's movement. "And yet I am here, which means your brother's options have narrowed to choices he would not have considered a week ago." Desperation makes fools of brilliant men. Zhen Mei completed her circuit, positioning herself directly in Lydia's sight line. "Tell me, Miss Kitchen, why should I trust that you will not simply take our money and disappear when the real threat arrives? Why should I believe you are anything more than another mercenary looking to profit from my brother's crisis?" "You should not trust me," Lydia replied, her voice carrying the flat affect of someone who had stopped caring about social niceties. "Trust is irrelevant. Results are the only currency that matters. Your brother will live or die based on my competence, not on whether you approve of my presence. The assassins coming for him will not care about your opinion either. They will care only about the $25 million and the most efficient path to claiming it." Something flickered in Zhen Mei's expression, not approval exactly, but a reassessment of the variables. "You speak Cantonese." It was not a question. Lydia's micro-expression when the guards had insulted her had been noticed. She had revealed herself without intending to. "Fluently," Lydia confirmed, seeing no point in denial. "I understood every word your guards said. I will remember every face. When this is over, you should consider whether men who underestimate threats based on appearance can actually keep anyone safe." Zhen Mei's lips curved into something that might have been a smile if it had contained any warmth. "Perhaps you are not completely useless. But understand this, Miss Kitchen, my brother built this empire through blood and sacrifice. If you fail him, there will be nowhere in Asia you can hide from the consequences. Not Seoul, not anywhere." "If I fail him, he will be dead," Lydia replied. "Which means your threats will be significantly less relevant than the succession war that follows. The full moon is 4 days away. I suggest we focus on ensuring your brother survives to see it set." The 2 women held eye contact for a long moment, each measuring the other's capacity for necessary violence. Finally, Zhen Mei stepped aside, gesturing toward the interior doors. "My brother is waiting. Try not to embarrass us further with whatever passes for credentials in your world." Lydia walked past her without response, knowing that she had just been evaluated and provisionally accepted. The sister was dangerous in ways that went beyond the obvious. File that information away. Trust nothing. Survive the next 4 days. The full moon was counting down. The Iron Dragon's den had opened its jaws. Now came the test of whether she could keep them from closing around Zhen Chang's throat. Lydia had been on the compound for 18 hours when the meeting was called. Emergency session, Zhen's remaining inner circle, the kind of gathering that happened when empires teetered on the edge of collapse. She was not invited to participate. She was positioned in the corner of the conference room like a piece of furniture, silent and seemingly irrelevant, exactly where she wanted to be. The conference room occupied the second floor of the main building, windows of bulletproof glass overlooking the courtyard below. 12 men sat around a table of polished black walnut, each representing a critical piece of Zhen's organizational structure: shipping operations, financial networks, political connections, enforcement divisions. Together, they controlled billions in assets and countless lives. Together, they were supposed to be untouchable. Zhen sat at the head of the table, May at his right hand, her expression carved from ice. The conversation had been running for 20 minutes, cycling through contingency plans and security protocols, each man offering suggestions that sounded reasonable and revealed nothing. Lydia listened to the Cantonese flowing around the room, cataloging not just the words but the micro-expressions, the hand positions, the tells that separated genuine concern from theatrical performance. 3 men were wrong. She had identified them within the first 10 minutes. The first was Li Huang, head of financial operations, who sat with his hands flat on the table in a posture that suggested transparency, but kept his fingers positioned exactly where he could reach the Glock holstered under his left arm. His eyes tracked Zhen's movements with the focus of someone calculating trajectory rather than listening to strategy. The second was Vincent Zhao, Enforcement Division, who had positioned his chair 6 inches farther from the table than everyone else, enough space to stand quickly without obstruction. His right foot was angled toward the door, his weight already shifted forward, ready to move. The third was Tommy Chen, no relation to the dead security chief, who controlled political connections and smiled too much, while his hands stayed below the table edge where nobody could see what they were doing. Lydia remained perfectly still, a shadow in the corner, watching the choreography of betrayal unfold. They were waiting for something. A signal, perhaps, or simply the right moment when attention was divided and opportunity presented itself. "We should evacuate Zhen to one of the safe houses," Li Huang was saying, his voice reasonable and calm. "The compound is too exposed, too many angles of attack." "And which safe house do you suggest?" May's question carried a blade hidden in silk. "The one in Macau that was compromised last month. The one in Singapore where our security team was replaced without authorization." Li's expression flickered, just for a microsecond. Caught. That was when Tommy Chen's hand came up from beneath the table holding a compact pistol aimed directly at Zhen's head. Vincent Zhao was already moving, his own weapon clearing leather with practiced efficiency. Li Huang's fingers closed around his Glock. 3 guns, 3 coordinated shooters, the kind of execution that required planning and communication, the kind of betrayal that came from inside the family. 9 seconds. That was all the time Lydia needed to destroy their careful choreography. She moved before conscious thought engaged, her body already committed to the geometry of violence while their guns were still tracking toward targets. The folding knife she had kept concealed in her boot was in her hand before she covered half the distance to Tommy Chen. Her first strike hit his wrist with surgical precision, the blade opening tendons and nerves, his pistol clattering to the floor before his finger reached the trigger. Vincent Zhao swung his weapon toward her, his eyes wide with the shock of someone who had forgotten the shadow in the corner was actually a threat. Lydia's left hand caught his gun arm, redirecting the barrel toward the ceiling as her right drove the blade into the pressure point beneath his collarbone. Not lethal, but devastating. He collapsed to his knees, weapon falling from nerveless fingers. Li Huang was faster than the others, his Glock already tracking toward her center mass, his finger applying pressure to the trigger. Lydia dropped below his sight line, her momentum carrying her into a slide across the polished floor. Her blade found his ankle, opening the Achilles tendon with a precision that spoke of countless repetitions in rooms that did not officially exist. He screamed, his shot going wild, punching through the ceiling tiles. 9 seconds from the first move to the last target neutralized. 3 traitors bleeding on the conference room floor, their assassination attempt dismantled before most of the men at the table had processed what was happening. Silence crashed over the room like a physical force. The remaining inner circle members sat frozen, their faces cycling through shock, fear, and the terrible understanding that they had just witnessed something that belonged in classified briefings rather than corporate meetings. Lydia retrieved the 3 weapons, ejecting magazines and clearing chambers with movements so automatic they might have been breathing. She placed them on the table in front of Zhen, aligned perfectly, and stepped back to her position in the corner. Her expression remained neutral, but her voice carried the weight of someone delivering a verdict. They were coordinated. They planned this together, which means the betrayal runs deeper than 3 men. You should ask them who gave the orders before they bleed out. Zhen's face had not changed expression during the entire 9 seconds of violence. Now he stood slowly, looking down at the 3 men writhing on his conference room floor, then at the remaining members of his inner circle who were trying very hard to appear innocent. "May," he said quietly, his voice carrying the kind of calm that preceded executions. "Call the medic, keep them alive for questioning. Nobody leaves this room until I know who else is involved." He turned to Lydia, studying her with the focus of someone reassessing every assumption. "You said they were coordinated. How long have you known?" "Since 10 minutes into the meeting. Body language, positioning, micro-expressions. They were waiting for the right moment. And you waited as well. Better to let them commit to the action. Now you have proof rather than suspicion." Zhen nodded slowly, then addressed the room in Cantonese, his words sharp enough to cut. "This woman, whom you mocked yesterday, whom you dismissed as desperation, just saved my life and exposed traitors sitting at my own table. Anyone else care to question her qualifications?" The silence that followed was absolute. Lydia remained in the corner, her knife cleaned and returned to her boot, her heart rate already back to resting levels. The full moon was 3 days away. The assassination attempt had come from inside, just as she had suspected. And now everyone in this compound knew exactly what she was capable of when 9 seconds was all the time she needed. The message had been delivered. The terms had been established. Let the real game begin. The interrogation of the 3 traitors had yielded names, but the names led nowhere useful. Shell companies, encrypted communication channels, dead drops in cities across 3 continents. Whoever was orchestrating the conspiracy against Zhen had built layers of operational security that would make intelligence agencies jealous, which gave Lydia her first real clue about what they were actually facing. This was not organized crime. This was something else entirely. She spent the next 12 hours mapping the compound's security infrastructure with the methodical focus of someone who had breached facilities designed by people smarter than Zhen's architects. The camera placements were competent but predictable. The motion sensors covered obvious approaches but left gaps in coverage that spoke of budget constraints rather than strategic design. The guard rotations followed patterns rigid enough to be exploited. But something bothered her. The compound's security was simultaneously too sophisticated and too flawed. State-of-the-art thermal imaging cameras positioned next to blind spots large enough to drive vehicles through. Military-grade encrypted communication systems running parallel to commercial-grade Wi-Fi networks. It felt like 2 different security philosophies installed at different times by people with conflicting objectives. Lydia stood in Zhen's security office, studying the wall of monitors displaying feeds from 83 cameras positioned throughout the estate. The head of security, Chen Wei's replacement, a nervous man named Wu who had been promoted into a position he clearly did not want, watched her with barely concealed anxiety. "Show me the server room," Lydia said. Wu hesitated. "The server room is restricted. Only Chen Wei had access before he." "Chen Wei is dead. I need to see the infrastructure that was supposed to keep him alive." Wu led her down 2 flights of stairs into the compound's basement, through a corridor lined with wine storage and mechanical systems, to a reinforced door that required both keycard and biometric access. The security measures were excessive for protecting computer servers in a private compound, which meant they were protecting something else. The server room was larger than expected, climate-controlled and humming with the white noise of active electronics. Standard equipment occupied the front section: routers, switches, backup power systems. But Lydia's attention fixed on the back wall, where a separate rack of equipment sat behind its own dedicated environmental controls. She moved closer, recognizing the configuration immediately: military-grade satellite uplink, encrypted burst transmitters, signal processing equipment designed for intelligence collection rather than corporate security. This was not infrastructure for protecting Zhen. This was infrastructure for monitoring him. "Who installed this?" Her voice remained calm, but Wu heard the edge beneath it. "I do not know. It was here when I took over Chen Wei's position. He told me it was upgraded security, classified systems for protecting sensitive communications." Lydia examined the equipment more closely, looking for manufacturer identification, serial numbers, anything that might indicate origin. Most of it had been carefully stripped of identifying marks, but she found what she was looking for on a circuit board inside one of the transmitters: a procurement code that belonged to a very specific branch of American military intelligence. The same branch she had worked for before her dishonorable discharge. Her mind processed the implications with cold efficiency. Chen Wei had not been killed by Zhen's rivals. He had been eliminated because he had discovered this surveillance hub or was part of the operation that installed it. The conspiracy was not just internal politics or criminal competition. Someone at the government level was running an operation against Zhen, using his own security infrastructure to feed intelligence to whoever was coordinating the assassination attempts. "I need access to the security footage archive," Lydia said. "Everything from the past 6 months." Wu led her to a workstation, his hands shaking slightly as he entered credentials. The archive was extensive, petabytes of data stored on redundant systems. Lydia began searching for patterns, focusing on the hidden surveillance equipment rather than the obvious cameras. She found the anomaly within 20 minutes. Once per week, for exactly 15 seconds, the hidden equipment transmitted a burst of compressed data via satellite uplink. The transmissions always occurred at 03:17 local time, when guard shifts changed and attention was divided. The data packets were heavily encrypted, but the transmission signature was distinctive enough to trace. Lydia pulled up the transmission logs, comparing them against the timeline of attacks on Zhen. Every assassination attempt had been preceded by a burst transmission exactly 72 hours earlier. The surveillance hub was not just monitoring Zhen. It was providing real-time intelligence to his enemies, feeding them his location, his schedule, his vulnerabilities. "How long has Chen Wei been dead?" she asked Wu. 18 days. "And when was the last burst transmission?" Wu checked the logs. 3 days ago, 03:17 as always. Lydia felt the pieces falling into place with the terrible clarity of a completed threat assessment. The full moon was 2 days away. The final transmission had already been sent, which meant the assassins were already in position, armed with perfect intelligence about Zhen's location, his security protocols, his defensive capabilities. They would come prepared for everything except the one variable that had not been in any previous surveillance report. "Sir, I need to speak with Zhen immediately," Lydia said, already moving toward the door. "And I need May present as well. What I am about to tell them will change their understanding of who they are actually fighting." Wu followed her up the stairs, struggling to match her pace. "What did you find?" "Proof that this was never about criminal rivalry or internal politics. Someone at the government level has been running an intelligence operation against Zhen for at least 6 months. Chen Wei was either part of it or discovered it and was eliminated. The surveillance hub in that basement is feeding real-time intelligence to whoever is coordinating the assassination attempts. But why? Why would a government care about a triad leader? Lydia paused at the top of the stairs, turning to face Wu with an expression that carried the weight of too many classified briefings and black operations that officially never happened. Because Zhen knows something, controls something, or represents a threat to something that goes beyond organized crime. The $25 million bounty is not about money. It is about making his death look like criminal competition while hiding the real reason someone wants him eliminated. She continued toward Zhen's office, her mind already calculating the new variables this discovery introduced. The full moon siege would not be a disorganized assault by bounty hunters. It would be a coordinated military operation disguised as criminal violence. The attackers would have perfect intelligence, military-grade equipment, and operational protocols designed by people who understood exactly how to breach facilities that were supposed to be impregnable. But they would be expecting Zhen's standard security measures. They would be planning for the compound they had been monitoring for 6 months. They would not be prepared for what Lydia was about to turn this estate into over the next 48 hours. The hidden eye had been discovered. Now it was time to use that knowledge to transform the battlefield into something the Watchers had never anticipated. The full moon was 2 days away, and the assassins were coming armed with perfect intelligence about a fortress that was about to become something entirely different. Let them come with their satellite imagery and their surveillance reports. Let them arrive confident in their understanding of the battlefield. Lydia Kitchen had spent 8 years learning how to turn defended positions into killing grounds, and she had exactly 48 hours to give Zhen's compound the most lethal education of its existence. Zhen studied the surveillance equipment in silence for 3 full minutes, his expression revealing nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the measured calm of a man who had built an empire by never showing weakness even when the foundations were crumbling beneath him. You are telling me that my own security infrastructure has been feeding intelligence to my enemies for 6 months. At minimum, Lydia confirmed. Possibly longer. The equipment is sophisticated enough that it could have been installed during the original security upgrades 2 years ago. Chen Wei either discovered it recently or was part of the operation from the beginning. Mei leaned against the wall, arms crossed, her analytical mind already processing implications. If this is government-level surveillance, then the full moon assault will not be random bounty hunters. It will be coordinated, professional, and informed by perfect intelligence about our defenses. Which gives us exactly one advantage, Lydia said. They do not know that we know. The last transmission went out 3 days ago, which means their intelligence is 72 hours old. We have 48 hours to transform this compound into something their surveillance never captured. Zhen's eyes narrowed. What are you proposing? Total lockdown. Nobody enters or leaves until after the full moon. We assume everyone currently inside the compound is potentially compromised. We relocate you to a section of the estate that was not covered by the hidden surveillance. And we turn every approach, every corridor, every room into a controlled engagement zone designed to neutralize threats without killing them. Without killing them, May's skepticism was immediate. You want to face professional assassins with non-lethal force. I want to capture them, Lydia corrected. Dead men tell no stories, but professional operatives taken alive, especially ones carrying military-grade equipment and operating under government coordination, become evidence. They become leverage. They become the ammunition we need to destroy whoever is orchestrating this conspiracy. Zhen considered this, his fingers drumming once against the desk in a gesture Lydia had learned meant he was calculating risk versus reward. You would need complete authority over security operations. My people would resist taking orders from an outsider. Your people can resist or they can die when the assault begins. Their choice. Lydia's tone allowed no compromise. The full moon is 48 hours away. I do not have time to negotiate command structure with men who are either incompetent or compromised. You hired me to keep you alive. Let me do the job or find someone else to attend your funeral." The silence that followed was broken by May's unexpected laugh, sharp and humorless. "She is not subtle, this one." "Subtlety is for people with more time than I have," Lydia replied. "Do I have command authority or not?" Zhen nodded once. "You have it. May will ensure compliance. Anyone who refuses to follow your orders will be removed from the compound immediately." "Good, then we start now." The next 48 hours unfolded with the mechanical precision of a military operation, executed under impossible time constraints. Lydia began by identifying which sections of the compound had been covered by the hidden surveillance and which had remained invisible to the watchers. A 2-story guest residence on the eastern edge of the property had minimal camera coverage and no direct line of sight from the surveillance hub's satellite uplink. That became Zhen's new fortress within the fortress. She ordered every guard who had been present during the original security upgrade 2 years ago removed from active duty. 12 men total, including 3 who protested loudly enough that May had them escorted off the property entirely. The remaining security force was consolidated, reorganized, and given new protocols that contradicted everything they had trained for. Then came the requisition list. Lydia handed it to Wu, who read it with increasing confusion. Riot foam canisters, flashbang grenades, rubber projectile ammunition, industrial adhesive spray, electromagnetic pulse devices, tactical nets. He looked up at her. "This is equipment for containment, not combat." "Exactly. I need 53 sets of flex cuffs, medical restraints, and tranquilizer systems designed for large animals. I need motion sensors repositioned to create overlapping coverage zones rather than perimeter defense. I need the compound's lighting system rewired so I can control individual sections independently. And I need all of it installed within 36 hours. This is impossible." "Then you will need to work faster. The full moon does not care about your logistics constraints." Wu disappeared to coordinate procurement, while Lydia began the physical transformation of the compound. She moved through the estate with architectural plans and a tactical mind that saw every space as a potential engagement zone. The manicured gardens became channeling terrain, forcing approaches into predetermined kill zones. The ornamental ponds were drained and lined with industrial adhesive that would trap anyone attempting to use them for cover. The decorative rockwork was repositioned to create natural choke points. Inside the main building, she converted guest rooms into containment cells, reinforcing doors and installing restraint points. She repositioned furniture to create obstacles that would slow attackers without providing effective cover. She identified 16 different locations where she could deploy non-lethal systems to create overlapping fields of suppression. The guards watched her work with expressions ranging from confusion to outright hostility. They had trained for firefights and defensive positions, not for elaborate trap systems and containment protocols. But May's presence, cold and uncompromising, ensured compliance even when understanding was absent. 24 hours before the full moon, Lydia assembled the remaining security force in the main courtyard. 32 men, each one armed and supposedly loyal, though she trusted none of them completely. She addressed them in Cantonese, her voice carrying across the space with the flat authority of someone who had briefed special operations teams before high-risk insertions. "Tomorrow night, this compound will be attacked by approximately 50 professional operatives. They will be equipped with military-grade weapons, tactical communications, and perfect intelligence about our standard defensive protocols. They will expect a conventional firefight where superior numbers and coordination will allow them to overwhelm our positions." She paused, letting the weight of that assessment settle over them. "They are going to be disappointed. We are not fighting to kill. We are fighting to capture. Every system I have installed over the past 2 days is designed to neutralize threats without lethal force. Your weapons will be loaded with rubber projectiles unless I specifically authorize lethal ammunition. Your orders are to contain, restrain, and secure, not to kill." One of the guards, a veteran named Huang who had served Zhen for over a decade, raised his hand. Why? Why show mercy to people who are coming to murder our employer? Because dead assassins cannot tell us who hired them. Because this conspiracy runs deeper than criminal rivalry. Because the people orchestrating this attack are counting on us responding with lethal force so the bodies can be cleaned up and the truth can be buried. Lydia's eyes swept across the assembled men. We are going to deny them that convenience. We are going to capture their operatives, extract their intelligence, and use them to destroy the shadow organization that thought it could eliminate Zhen Cheng without consequences. She pointed to the repositioned guard stations, the modified sight lines, the zones she had designated for specific engagement protocols. You will fight from these positions, not the ones you trained at. You will use the equipment I have specified, not the weapons you are comfortable with. You will follow my commands during the assault, not your instincts. Anyone who cannot accept these terms should leave now. I do not have time to correct mistakes during combat. Nobody moved. Fear, loyalty, or professional pride kept them rooted in place. Good. Final briefing will be at sunset tomorrow. Until then, familiarize yourselves with the new protocols. Check and recheck your equipment. Get rest if you can. The full moon rises at 21:47 tomorrow. The assault will begin shortly after darkness is complete. By sunrise, this compound will either be a fortress that held or a tomb that failed. Your performance will determine which. She dismissed them with a gesture, then turned to find Zhen watching from a second-floor window. His expression was unreadable, but when their eyes met across the distance, he nodded once. Permission granted. Authority confirmed. Trust provisionally extended. Lydia returned to her preparations, moving through the compound with the checklist of someone who had done this before in places where mistakes meant death. She tested every system, verified every sight line, confirmed every backup protocol. The trap was set. The battlefield was prepared. The full moon was 36 hours away. Somewhere out in the darkness, 53 professional killers were making their own preparations, studying satellite imagery and surveillance reports that showed a fortress they thought they understood. They were moving into position with confidence born of perfect intelligence and superior numbers. They had no idea they were walking into a nightmare designed by someone who had spent 8 years turning defended positions into operational disasters for people significantly better trained than them. Lydia Kitchen had transformed Zhen's compound into something that existed in the gap between their intelligence reports and reality. Let them come with their perfect plans and their military-grade equipment. Let them arrive confident in their understanding of the battlefield. The full moon would rise on a fortress that no longer matched any surveillance data they possessed. And when the sun came up again, 53 professional operatives would understand exactly what it meant to underestimate the woman they should have killed first. The full moon rose at 21:47, exactly as predicted, casting silver light across the compound's manicured gardens and reinforced walls. Lydia stood in the central security office, surrounded by monitors displaying feeds from every repositioned camera, every sensor, every trap she had spent 48 hours installing. The guards were positioned at their assigned stations, weapons loaded with rubber projectiles, communication headsets tuned to the encrypted frequency she controlled. Zhen and Mei were secured in the eastern guest residence, protected by redundant security layers and evacuation protocols. Wu monitored the perimeter sensors from a backup station. Everything was ready. Everything was waiting. The assault began at 22:13 with a precision that confirmed Lydia's assessment. This was not a disorganized bounty rush. This was a coordinated military operation. The first wave came over the southern wall in 4-man teams, using suppressed grappling hooks and tactical climbing gear. 12 operatives total, moving with the fluid coordination of people who had trained together extensively. They hit the ground in predetermined positions, weapons raised, scanning for threats according to intelligence reports that were 48 hours outdated. Lydia waited until all 12 were committed inside the compound perimeter before activating the first trap. Industrial adhesive spray deployed from concealed positions in the ornamental rockwork, coating the operatives' boots and lower legs with a fast-hardening compound. 3 of them realized the threat and tried to retreat, but the adhesive locked them in place within seconds. The remaining 9 attempted to advance, finding their mobility reduced to an awkward shuffle. She activated the flashbangs remotely, positioned at head height in clusters throughout the southern approach. The disorientation was immediate and devastating. Blinded and deafened, unable to move effectively, the first wave became targets rather than threats. Team 3, move in, Lydia commanded over the radio. Containment protocol, restrain and secure. Zhen's guards emerged from concealed positions, moving with the nervous efficiency of men following orders they did not fully understand but had been trained to execute. Flex cuffs and restraints deployed. Within 90 seconds, all 12 operatives from the first wave were secured and being dragged to the converted containment cells. The second wave adjusted tactics immediately. 18 operatives, this time breaching the northern and eastern walls simultaneously, using the first wave's failure as a learning opportunity. They moved faster, avoided the obvious trap zones, communicated through hand signals to minimize radio interception. Lydia had anticipated the adaptation. She triggered the electromagnetic pulse devices positioned along the northern wall, frying their night vision equipment and tactical radios. Simultaneously, she cut power to the northern section of the compound, plunging that entire approach into absolute darkness. The operatives stumbled forward, training telling them to maintain formation even when visibility dropped to 0. The tactical nets deployed from above, spring-loaded mechanisms that Lydia had installed in the decorative roof architecture. Heavy-gauge netting designed for capturing large animals dropped over advancing teams, tangling limbs and weapons. The operatives struggled, training and discipline keeping them from panic, but their mobility was destroyed. Teams 5 and 7, northern containment. Team 6, eastern approach, Lydia directed, her voice calm despite the kinetic chaos unfolding across multiple fronts. The guards executed with increasing confidence, rubber projectiles suppressing resistance, tranquilizer systems deployed against operatives who continued fighting despite restraints. The second wave went down harder than the first, but they went down nonetheless. 30 operatives neutralized, 23 remaining. The third wave showed genuine tactical innovation. They did not breach the walls. Instead, they cut through the compound's underground utility access points, emerging inside the perimeter from positions the surveillance reports had identified as secure zones. 8 operatives, equipped with thermal imaging and prepared for close-quarters combat in tight spaces. But Lydia had rewired the compound's entire infrastructure. The utility tunnels they were using as insertion points had been converted into channeling terrain with only one viable exit route, directly into a converted guest room where riot foam canisters waited on pressure triggers. The foam deployed with industrial efficiency, expanding to fill the corridor in seconds. The operatives tried to retreat, but found the access points they had entered through now sealed with reinforced barriers. Trapped in expanding foam that hardened around them like quick-setting concrete, they were immobilized before they could engage any targets. Team 2, subsurface extraction, Lydia ordered. Standard containment. 30 it down, 15 remaining. The fourth wave was smaller, faster, and significantly more dangerous. 15 operatives who had watched 3 waves fail and adapted their approach accordingly. They breached multiple points simultaneously: walls, roof access, a coordinated vehicle ram through the reinforced main gate. They moved with the desperate aggression of people who understood they were running out of options and time. This was the wave Lydia had been waiting for. The wave that would commit fully, abandon caution, and expose themselves in ways the previous assaults had not. She let them penetrate deeper into the compound than any previous wave, drawing them into the main building where the overlapping trap systems were densest. They moved through corridors that appeared undefended, their training screaming warnings that their operational momentum overrode. By the time they realized they were not breaching the fortress, but being channeled into predetermined killing zones, it was too late. Flashbangs and riot foam deployed in sequence, creating cascading suppression zones. The operatives tried to fall back, but found their retreat routes blocked by barriers that had not existed 30 seconds earlier. Lydia had designed the main building's interior to function as a three-dimensional maze, where every turn offered the illusion of escape while actually leading deeper into containment. She moved through the chaos personally for this wave, abandoning the security office to engage directly. Her combat knife remained sheathed. She used only her hands, the rubber projectile sidearm, and the tranquilizer system when operatives proved particularly resistant. Each engagement was surgical, economical, brutally efficient. One operative, clearly ex-military based on his movement patterns, managed to get within striking distance. He was good. His hand-to-hand training evident in every blocked strike and countermove. But Lydia had been trained by people who taught special operations teams, and she had 8 years of operational experience that existed in classified files no one would ever read. She broke his wrist, dislocated his shoulder, and put him in a submission hold that rendered him unconscious within 7 seconds. The last operative from the fourth wave was a woman, Pakistani or Afghan based on features, moving with the cold precision of someone who had been doing this professionally for years. She recognized Lydia immediately, her eyes widening with the shock of someone confronting a ghost. Kitchen. The name emerged with an accent that placed her training somewhere in the Middle East. You know me, Lydia replied, maintaining defensive distance. Everyone in the community knows you, the disgraced specialist, the weapon that went rogue. There is a different bounty on your head in certain circles. And yet here you are, walking into a trap for $25 million. Poor career decision. They circled each other, two professionals evaluating threat levels and tactical options. The Pakistani operative's hand moved toward a concealed backup weapon. Lydia's tranquilizer system was already tracking the movement. The dart took the woman in the neck before her fingers reached the gun. She collapsed with a curse in Pashto that Lydia understood perfectly. 53 down, 0 remaining active. The compound fell silent except for the groaning of restrained operatives and the rapid communications of guards securing the final prisoners. Lydia moved through the aftermath, checking each containment cell, verifying each restraint, cataloging equipment and identification that would provide the intelligence Jen needed. The sun was 3 hours from rising when she finally returned to the security office. Wu stared at the monitors showing the captured operatives, his expression cycling through disbelief and something approaching awe. 53 professional assassins, he said quietly. All neutralized, all captured alive. This is impossible. It was probable, Lydia corrected, her voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who had just executed an A-tower tactical operation without pause. They came prepared for conventional defense. We gave them something else entirely. Jen emerged from the eastern residence, May at his side, both of them surveying the compound grounds littered with tranquilized operatives and disabled equipment. Jen's expression remained neutral, but his eyes held the calculation of someone reassessing every assumption about capability and value. How many casualties on our side? He asked. 7 guards injured, none critically. The operatives were professionals, but they were fighting blind against a battlefield they did not understand. Lydia gestured at the monitors. We need to begin interrogations immediately. These people were coordinated by someone with significant resources and intelligence capabilities. The sooner we extract information, the sooner we can identify who orchestrated this. Agreed. May will coordinate the interrogations. You should rest. I will rest when I know who sent them and why. Lydia turned to face Jen directly. There is one more thing. The woman from the fourth wave recognized me. She knew my name, my history, my reputation in certain intelligence circles, which means this operation was not just about you. Someone knew I would be here. Someone wanted both of us in the same place at the same time. The implications settled over the room like a weight. This had never been about a simple assassination. This had been about eliminating 2 threats simultaneously, Jen for whatever he represented, and Lydia for whatever she knew. Then we have a larger problem than we anticipated, May said quietly. "We have exactly the problem I expected," Lydia replied. "The full moon was never the end. It was the beginning. Whoever orchestrated this will not stop because one assault failed. They will adapt, escalate, and come at us from different angles. We bought time, not safety." She moved toward the door, then paused. "But we also have 53 sources of intelligence who can tell us who our real enemies are. By sunrise, we will know what we are actually fighting, and then we can start hunting the hunters." The full moon was setting over a fortress that had held against impossible odds. 53 professional operatives lay restrained in containment cells, their perfect intelligence rendered obsolete by a woman who had transformed a static defense into an adaptive nightmare. The siege was over. But the war had only just begun. The interrogations had been running for 3 hours when Lydia noticed the pattern. 47 of the captured operatives were exactly what they appeared to be: mercenaries, contractors, former military personnel motivated by the bounty and coordinated through encrypted communication channels. They knew their assignments, their insertion points, their tactical objectives, but they knew nothing about who had hired them or why. 6 operatives were different. They had no identification, carried no personal effects, and refused to speak even under chemical interrogation. Their training was too consistent, too specific. Government operatives, almost certainly American based on equipment and tactical doctrine, and they were all waiting for something. Lydia was reviewing interrogation transcripts in the security office when the perimeter alarm triggered. Single contact, approaching from the eastern approach on foot, making no attempt at concealment or stealth. The thermal cameras showed a lone figure walking toward the main gate with the casual confidence of someone who expected to be admitted. She zoomed the camera feed, and ice crystallized in her chest. Commander Marcus Cole, her former handler, the man who had trained her, deployed her, and ultimately signed the paperwork for her dishonorable discharge. The man who knew every operation she had run, every target she had eliminated, every classified secret she carried in her head. He was wearing civilian clothes, no visible weapons, his hands held slightly away from his body in a gesture that could be interpreted as non-threatening. But Lydia knew him well enough to recognize this was theater. Cole never moved without purpose, never appeared without calculating every angle of advantage. "Do not open the gate," she told Wu over the radio. "I will handle this personally." She descended to the compound's main entrance, her sidearm loaded with standard ammunition now rather than rubber projectiles. Whatever Cole wanted, it would not end with polite conversation. He waited on the opposite side of the reinforced gate, his expression carrying the patient amusement of someone watching a student's test performance. When Lydia appeared, his smile widened. "Kitchen, you have become significantly more difficult to find in recent years." "That was intentional. What do you want, Cole?" "To retrieve my operatives, the 6 who are refusing to cooperate with your interrogations. They are valuable assets, trained at considerable expense, and I would prefer they return to service rather than rot in whatever makeshift cells you have constructed. Your operatives participated in an assassination attempt on my employer. They stay in the cells." Cole's smile did not waver. "Your employer is a criminal who has been under investigation by multiple governments for trafficking operations that have killed hundreds of people. The bounty was not random gang violence. It was a sanctioned operation to eliminate a threat to regional stability." "Sanctioned by whom?" "By people who understand that some threats cannot be addressed through conventional law enforcement." He stepped closer to the gate, his tone shifting from amusement to something harder. "You were supposed to be dead, Kitchen. Libya was supposed to be your last operation. The fact that you survived and then disappeared created complications we have been trying to resolve for 3 years. When intelligence indicated you had surfaced in Seoul, protecting a high-value target we needed eliminated, it seemed like an efficient solution to 2 problems. The pieces fell into place with terrible clarity. The surveillance hub, the coordinated assault, the operatives who knew her name. This had never been about Zhen alone. Cole had engineered the entire operation to eliminate both of them simultaneously, closing files that were supposed to have been sealed years ago. You sent 53 people to die just to clean up your personnel records, Lydia said, her voice flat with the kind of rage that had learned to express itself through stillness rather than volume. I sent 53 people to complete an operation. The fact that they failed is disappointing but not catastrophic. I have other assets, other approaches. Cole's expression hardened. But those 6 operatives inside your compound know details about programs that cannot be compromised. I need them back. I am willing to negotiate terms. The only terms that matter are the ones where you walk away now and never come back. That is not an option I can accept. Cole moved then, his hand sweeping toward a concealed weapon with the speed of someone who had spent decades in operational environments. But Lydia had been trained by him, which meant she knew his patterns, his tells, the micro-movements that preceded action. Her sidearm cleared leather before his fingers reached the holster. "Do not," she said quietly. He froze, calculating odds, assessing angles. Then he smiled again, this time with genuine approval. "You have improved since Libya, less hesitation, more willing to commit to necessary violence. You taught me well, now leave." "I cannot do that, Kitchen. Those 6 operatives represent an existential threat to programs that involve national security. I will retrieve them by force if necessary." "Then you will die trying." The standoff held for 3 seconds before Cole moved again, this time committing fully to the engagement. He was fast, trained, experienced. But Lydia had spent 3 years surviving in environments where hesitation meant death, and she had stopped caring about consequences long before this moment. The fight was brutal and personal in ways that transcended professional violence. Every strike Cole threw, Lydia recognized from training sessions years ago. Every countermove she deployed, he had taught her himself. They moved through the compound's entrance area with the terrible symmetry of teacher and student testing each other's evolution. Cole was stronger, heavier, with reach advantages that he exploited ruthlessly. But Lydia was faster, more desperate, and unburdened by the hesitation that came from believing you would survive. She absorbed strikes that should have ended the fight, using pain as fuel rather than limitation. Her blade found his thigh, opening a wound that would need immediate medical attention. His elbow caught her temple, sending vision swimming and balance faltering. They grappled, separated, engaged again with the relentless intensity of people who understood this would end with someone not walking away. Lydia saw the opening when Cole's weight shifted wrong, his injured leg compromising his stance for a fraction of a second. She drove inside his guard, her blade seeking the pressure points she had been taught to exploit during black operations training. Non-lethal but devastating, the kind of strikes designed to neutralize threats without creating bodies that raised questions. Cole collapsed, his leg giving out, his breathing ragged. Lydia stood over him, blade still in hand, waiting to see if he would attempt to continue. "You should have stayed dead," he said through gritted teeth. "You should have disappeared after Libya and never surfaced. Now you are a liability I cannot ignore. I am the weapon you created. What did you think would happen when you tried to throw me away?" Before Cole could respond, the security office door opened and May emerged, but not the May who had been Jen's sister and advisor. This version moved with different body language, carried herself with the posture of someone operating under different protocols. She held a badge case, which she opened to reveal credentials that made Lydia's blood run cold. Central Intelligence Agency, Field Operations Division, Special Agent Jen May, except that was not her real name. "Commander Cole, you are in violation of operational parameters," May said, her English now carrying a different accent, the faint traces of American education rather than international business schools. "This compound is under active surveillance by multiple agencies. Your presence here creates diplomatic complications that exceed your authorization level." Cole stared at her with the expression of someone watching carefully laid plans detonate unexpectedly. You have been undercover in Jen's organization this entire time." "For 18 months. My assignment was to build a case for legal prosecution, not to facilitate an unsanctioned assassination operation that violates international law. She moved closer, her weapon now visible in a hip holster. The surveillance hub you installed compromised my operation. The assault you coordinated nearly exposed my cover, and your presence here has turned a controlled intelligence operation into a potential international incident. Lydia looked between them, understanding cascading through exhaustion and pain. Zhen does not know. He thinks you are his sister. My relationship with him is complicated, May acknowledged. But my orders have always been to gather intelligence, not to facilitate murder. What Cole orchestrated here was off-book, unauthorized, and designed to eliminate witnesses to programs that should have been shut down years ago. Programs like the one that trained Kitchen, Cole said, his voice carrying bitter amusement despite his injuries. Programs like the one that created weapons too effective to be allowed to exist publicly. You think your handlers are any different than mine? You think the people who sent you undercover care about international law when assets become liabilities? May's expression did not change, but something flickered in her eyes. Doubt, or recognition, or the terrible understanding that Cole was not entirely wrong. The difference, she said carefully, is that I am operating within legal frameworks, even if those frameworks are imperfect. You are operating outside all oversight, eliminating threats without due process, and creating body counts that cannot be justified by any standard. Due process is a luxury for people who do not understand the threats we face. Cole struggled to his feet, leaning against the wall for support. But this conversation is academic. My operatives remain in your custody. Lydia remains a loose end that cannot be tolerated. And your cover, Agent May, is now comprehensively compromised. None of us are leaving this compound with our operations intact. Lydia watched the exchange with the detached focus of someone trying to process too many revelations simultaneously. May was CIA. The sister relationship was fabricated. The entire infrastructure of trust that Zhen had built around her was an intelligence operation. And Cole, her former handler, had orchestrated an unsanctioned assassination attempt that violated protocols from multiple angles. What happens now? Lydia asked, addressing the question to both of them. May holstered her weapon, her expression carefully neutral. Now I complete my assignment by arresting Commander Cole for unauthorized operations on foreign soil. You and Zhen have decisions to make about how much of this becomes public and how much remains buried. And we all acknowledge that the real conspiracy here runs significantly deeper than any of us initially understood. The real conspiracy, Cole said, his voice carrying the weight of someone delivering a final lesson, is that organizations like Spectre exist specifically because governments need deniability. They exist in the gap between what is legally permissible and what is operationally necessary. You cannot destroy them without destroying the systems that created them, and neither of you has the authority or resources to accomplish that. He looked at Lydia directly, his expression carrying something that might have been respect if it had contained any warmth. You survived Libya because you were better than your training. You survived Seoul because you are becoming something I did not intend to create. Whatever you do next, Kitchen, understand that every government agency that knows your name considers you a threat that needs to be neutralized. Running will not save you. Hiding will not protect you. The only path forward is to become dangerous enough that eliminating you costs more than tolerating your existence. Zhen's guards arrived then, surrounding Cole with weapons raised, responding to alerts triggered during the fight. May gave orders for his restraint and medical treatment, her voice carrying the professional authority of someone resuming operational control. Lydia stepped back, watching the aftermath unfold with the numb exhaustion of someone who had just survived one war only to discover a larger conflict waiting beyond it. The full moon had set. 53 assassins were contained. Her former handler was neutralized, and the woman she had been protecting alongside Zhen was an undercover federal agent whose entire relationship with him was an elaborate fiction. Zhen emerged from the eastern residence, his expression unreadable as he surveyed the scene. His eyes found May, then Lydia, then settled on Cole being restrained by guards. He said nothing, but Lydia could see the calculations running behind his carefully controlled features. Betrayal, revelation, reassessment. We need to talk, Zhen said quietly. All three of us, about what happens next. Lydia nodded, too tired to process the implications fully. The siege was over. The immediate threat was neutralized. But the real war, the one against shadow organizations and government programs that existed in gaps between oversight and accountability, was only beginning. And somewhere in the gray space between legal authority and operational necessity, Spectre was watching, calculating, and preparing its next move. The meeting took place in the Eastern residence at dawn, three people who should have been enemies sitting around a table discussing survival. Zhen Chang, crime lord whose empire had been infiltrated and nearly destroyed. Lydia Kitchen, disgraced operative whose existence was an inconvenience to multiple governments. And the woman they had both known as Zhen Mei, whose real name was Agent Sarah Chen, and whose entire relationship with both of them had been an 18-month intelligence operation. The silence was heavy with betrayal, calculation, and the terrible understanding that none of them could walk away from this without consequences that would follow them for years. Zhen spoke first, his voice carrying the controlled calm of someone who had spent the night processing impossible revelations. 18 months. You sat at my table. You advised me on business decisions. You called me brother. All of it was surveillance. All of it was my assignment, Sarah replied, using her real name now that pretense was pointless. But not all of it was false. I was tasked with building a prosecutable case against your organization. What I discovered was significantly more complicated than criminal enterprise. Explain. Sarah pulled a tablet from her bag, displaying financial data that had taken months to compile. Your shipping operations move legitimate cargo alongside contraband, but the contraband is not what I expected to find. Weapons, yes, but also intelligence assets, defectors, witnesses fleeing government persecution. Your network has been providing extraction services for people who would otherwise disappear into black sites or unmarked graves. Zhen's expression did not change. You are saying my criminal organization has been conducting humanitarian operations. I am saying your network has become a problem for governments that rely on people disappearing quietly. Chen Wei discovered this 6 months ago. He found evidence that your extraction operations had embarrassed multiple intelligence agencies. That is when Spectre became involved, not to eliminate a crime lord, but to destroy infrastructure that was interfering with their operational flexibility. Lydia listened to the exchange, pieces falling into place with brutal clarity. Spectre is not a criminal organization. It is an intelligence coordination network that operates in the gray space between government agencies. They facilitate operations that cannot be officially sanctioned. Assassinations, renditions, surveillance that violates international law. And they exist because governments need deniability, Sarah confirmed. When official channels cannot act, Spectre provides resources without attribution. Commander Cole was one of their operational assets. The surveillance hub, the assassination attempt, all of it was Spectre cleaning up problems that had become too visible. Zhen stood, moving to the window overlooking the compound grounds where 53 captured operatives were being processed by local authorities who had finally been permitted to enter. His empire, built over 23 years through calculated brutality, was being dismantled by revelations he had not anticipated. So my choices are simple, he said quietly. Continue operating and face continuous assassination attempts, or surrender to prosecution and spend whatever remains of my life in a cell. Or you take a third option, Lydia said. You liquidate the criminal operations, convert legitimate assets into something legal, and use the resources you have built to wage war against the organizations that tried to kill you. Zhen turned, studying her with the focus that had kept him alive through decades of violence. You are proposing I become legitimate to fight illegitimate organizations. The irony is not lost on me. The irony is survival, Lydia corrected. Spectre exists because it operates in shadows without accountability, but shadows only work when nobody is looking. You have shipping networks across 3 continents, financial infrastructure that spans dozens of jurisdictions. Intelligence assets embedded in organizations that would take years for conventional agencies to penetrate. Convert it, legitimize it, use it to expose operations that cannot survive public scrutiny. Sarah leaned forward, her analytical mind clearly engaging with the proposal. You are talking about turning Zhen's criminal network into a private intelligence organization that hunts shadow operations. I am talking about becoming dangerous enough that eliminating us costs more than tolerating our existence, Lydia replied, echoing Cole's final warning. Spectre relies on deniability. We remove that deniability by documenting their operations, exposing their assets, forcing them to operate in light they cannot control. Zhen returned to the table, his expression calculating risk versus reward with the same focus that had built his empire. This would require significant capital. Legitimate business operations do not generate the same profit margins as criminal enterprise. But they generate something more valuable, Sarah said, clearly shifting from opposition to strategic analysis. They generate legal protection, political connections, the ability to operate openly rather than hiding in gray markets. My agency has been building cases against criminal organizations for years, while shadow operations like Spectre exist without oversight. If Zhen's network converted to legitimate operations focused on transparency and accountability, certain elements within the intelligence community would find that useful. You are offering protection, Zhen said, in exchange for cooperation. I am offering the possibility of survival, Sarah corrected. My cover is compromised. My operation is exposed. But I still have contacts within the agency who understand that Spectre represents a threat to constitutional oversight. If we can document their operations, expose their command structure, we create political pressure that forces official action. Lydia stood, moving to where tactical maps of Asia were spread across a side table. She had been studying them during the night, identifying locations where Zhen's infrastructure intersected with known Spectre operations. We start with documentation. Every operation Cole coordinated left trails, financial transactions, communication intercepts, personnel movements. We compile evidence that cannot be denied or buried. Then we target their operational assets systematically. Not with violence, but with exposure. Force them into positions where their existence becomes too costly to maintain. This is a war against organizations with unlimited resources and no accountability, Zhen said. What makes you think 3 people, even with my infrastructure and your skills, can succeed where entire governments have failed? Because governments are constrained by laws, bureaucracy, and political considerations, Lydia replied. We are constrained only by what we are willing to risk. Spectre exists in the gap between legal and necessary. We exist in the gap between impossible and essential. Sarah pulled up additional files on her tablet, intelligence she had compiled during 18 months of undercover work. I have documentation of 17 Spectre operations across Asia-Pacific, locations of safe houses, identities of operational assets, financial networks that fund activities governments officially deny. If we leak this systematically, target operations that cannot be defended publicly, we force them to either acknowledge their existence or abandon operations they have invested years developing. And when they come for us, Zhen asked, when they decide elimination is more efficient than negotiation, then we demonstrate that we have contingency plans they cannot anticipate, Lydia said. Dead man switches. Encrypted files distributed to journalists and congressional oversight committees. Evidence that goes public if any of us disappear or die under suspicious circumstances. We become more dangerous dead than alive. The 3 of them fell silent, each processing the implications of what they were proposing. A criminal empire converting to legitimate operations. An undercover agent operating outside official channels. A disgraced operative with more classified secrets than most governments wanted to acknowledge. Together, they represented something Spectre had not planned for, threats that had survived elimination attempts and learned to weaponize their survival. If we do this, Zhen said finally, there is no returning to what we were. I cannot rebuild my criminal empire. You cannot return to official operations. Lydia cannot disappear again. We commit completely or we fail completely. I stopped having safe options 3 years ago, Lydia replied. This is simply the first dangerous option that gives me something worth the risk. Sarah nodded slowly. My career in the agency is over regardless. I either face disciplinary action for operational failure, or I use what I know to force systemic change. The second option seems more valuable. Jean stood, extending his hand across the table, first to Sarah, then to Lydia. The gesture was formal, binding, the kind of agreement that had sealed deals worth billions in his previous life. Then we are agreed. We convert my infrastructure to legitimate operations focused on transparency and accountability. We systematically expose Spectre's network across Asia-Pacific. And we accept that this war will likely consume years of our lives with no guarantee of success. Years of our lives fighting organizations that should not exist, Lydia said, accepting the handshake. Better than 3 years running from them. They spent the next 8 hours planning. Zhen's shipping operations would convert to legitimate logistics, partnering with NGOs and humanitarian organizations that needed discrete transportation networks. His financial infrastructure would become a consulting firm specializing in anti-money laundering and financial transparency. His intelligence assets would be redeployed to document criminal organizations and shadow operations rather than facilitate them. Sarah would coordinate with elements within the CIA that supported congressional oversight of intelligence operations. Her documented evidence of Spectre's activities would be leaked systematically to oversight committees, forcing official investigations that could not be quietly buried. Lydia would handle operational security and threat assessment, using her training to anticipate Spectre's responses and design countermeasures. She would also serve as the visible face of their efforts, the disgraced operative whose testimony about classified programs could not be officially acknowledged, but could not be publicly denied. As the sun climbed higher over the compound, transforming the battlefield from the night before into ordinary gardens and walls, the three of them finalized agreements that would reshape their lives. They were becoming something new, not criminals, not government assets, but independent actors fighting organizations that existed specifically, because independence was supposed to be impossible. One more thing, Lydia said as they prepared to brief the captured operatives about their options. Cole mentioned that Spectre exists because governments need deniability, which means destroying Spectre might create something worse, a vacuum where new organizations emerge with even less oversight. We need to consider whether exposure is enough, or whether we are fighting for systemic change that addresses why these organizations exist in the first place. Zhen smiled, the first genuine expression of humor he had shown since the revelations began. You are proposing we reform international intelligence oversight while simultaneously running a private organization that operates outside official channels. The contradiction is significant. The contradiction is the point, Lydia replied. We exist in the gap between what is legal and what is necessary, just like Spectre. The difference is we believe that gap should be visible, accountable, and subject to public scrutiny. They believe it should remain hidden. Sarah powered down her tablet, looking between them with an expression that mixed exhaustion and cautious optimism. Then, we have our mission. Expose the shadows, force accountability. Accept that we will likely fail but commit anyway because the alternative is allowing organizations like Spectre to operate without constraint. I have built an empire on worse odds, Zhen said. Let us begin. They walked out of the Eastern residence together, 3 unlikely allies bound by survival and the understanding that some wars were worth fighting even when victory seemed impossible. The compound grounds were being cleared of captured operatives, evidence being processed by authorities, the aftermath of the siege being carefully documented. But this was not an ending. It was a beginning. Somewhere in the gray space between government oversight and operational necessity, Spectre was receiving reports about the failed assassination attempt. They were learning that their targets had not only survived, but had united. They were discovering that the 3 people they had tried to eliminate separately were now collaborating to destroy the infrastructure that had sustained shadow operations for decades. And they were calculating their response, planning new approaches, adapting to threats they had not anticipated. Lydia Kitchen stood at the compound gate, looking out at Seoul's skyline, where millions of people moved through their lives unaware of the wars being fought in shadows they did not know existed. She had spent 3 years trying to disappear. Now she was about to become the most visible threat that invisible organizations had ever faced. The full moon had risen and set. 53 assassins had been neutralized. Her former handler was in custody. And the real war, the one that would define whether accountability could exist in spaces where governments claimed it was impossible, was only beginning. She turned back toward the compound, where Zhen and Sarah were already coordinating the next phase of operations. They had work to do, organizations to expose, operations to document, a global network to dismantle one carefully planned revelation at a time. The hunters had become the hunted. Now it was time to teach them what that actually meant.